is a term for that. We got to make more Eves. There's a Christmas Eve, there's a New Year's Eve, there's no other Eves. Happy July 3rd, almost July 4th. 249 years America will be celebrating tomorrow. So I hope all of my American friends, family, and brethren are looking forward to what I'm sure will be a great July 4th and a great weekend. We're going to give it a bit of time. We're going to see who joins. That is a sign that I'm live and people are getting the notifications. So we'll give it a couple minutes. And then, as I was saying yesterday, today we're going to talk a little bit about George Washington and Freemasonry. Seems appropriate on July 3rd. I'm going to be relying primarily on information from the George Washington Masonic National Memorial, which is a jewel in, or a feather, pick your term, in the cap of Freemasonry. I've had the chance to talk to some people who work there, to post some information about it on my Medium page. Never had the chance yet to actually visit, so it's on my list. But they post a lot of really valuable and valid information about George Washington, his Masonic career, and so we're going to be relying on that. Also, Ontario Masonic Lodge out of Instagram. I think that is referencing Ontario, California, not Ontario, the province. I've been posting a lot of stuff about some founding fathers who were Freemasons. John Hancock, Ben Franklin, the Enlightened Freemason, Paul Revere, Freemasons and the Founding of America is referenced. So I'm going to be talking about that as well. Wait, apparently, I'm just looking at this now. There's a conspiracy theory that Freemasons sunk the Titanic. So that is a new thing that just popped up in my feed. But for now, we're going to give it a few minutes. We're going to wait to see who joins. And then we're going to start talking about Freemasonry, more particularly George Washington and his Masonic career. But that comes later. First, let's see who joins us, who jumps in the chat, who says hello, and if there's anything that you guys want to talk about. Usually, oftentimes the first hour I'll spend just waiting to see who joins in. For this time, I'll probably jump into the actual conversation and actual topic a little bit quicker than I would otherwise. But still, I want to give it a few minutes at least. I want to see who else is going to join. Jump in the chat, say hello, let me know how it's going, and let me know if there's anything you want to talk about when it comes to Freemasonry. Like I said, the beautiful thing about these streams is it gives me a chance to have specific topics, but it also gives the audience a chance to ask general questions. Chelsea says hello. Hello, Chelsea. Hope you're doing well. As does Mtura. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. To both of you, if you are new to the stream, I hope you'll hit the like and subscribe button. If you're not new, then I hope that you're doing well and looking forward to a great weekend. I am here chatting about Freemasonry, which is my favorite thing to talk about. Today, in particular, we're going to be talking about Freemasonry and the history of, or George Washington's Masonic history, as well as some founding father and Freemasonry history, as well as just hanging out. I am doing well, Christopher. How are you doing? It has been a minute, so it's great to have you back. I hope you're doing well. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, all the things you say. Good. What's new? Are you looking forward to the weekend? Do you get a long weekend with July 4th coming up? But I hope everybody watching this is doing well. By the way, do me a favor. If you are a Mason and your Masonic Lodge is doing anything, I was here. I mean, I'm in Canada too. So, I don't know if you were watching, but I live streamed the fireworks at Assiniboia Downs here in Winnipeg. So that was a lot of fun. And yeah, it was just a good time. Yeah, it was an odd time to have a Tuesday. It was an odd time to have Canada on a Tuesday because it kind of messed everybody up, I think, because you have your weekend, Saturday, Sunday off, then you have to go back to work on Monday, then you have the Tuesday off. So I think for a lot of people, it kind of screwed up the America's got it better this year because their July 4th is on a Friday, so it's easier to plan a long weekend. Awesome. Yeah, we were gonna go and do some horse betting and then watch the fireworks, but there was a storm, so we could not bet on any horses. I could have been a millionaire. We just stuck to watching the fireworks, which was fun. It rained, so we got soaking wet. Probably gave my dad a cold, but you know what? It was really fun nonetheless. Your friend owns 7 horses there. That is awesome. That is very, very cool, Christopher. Let me know more like a zero now. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a reason there's not a lot of millionaires being made from horse racing. I'm sure there's a few, but I'm also sure it's probably really tough to. I would never want to be a professional gambler, put it that way. I don't think I'd do well. I'm just trying to set this up a little bit better so I can, while I'm talking, um, gambling is definitely a losing business. I would concur with that. I hope that this looks okay. Let me see if I can't get this a little bit better set up. Let me know, Christopher, if you can still hear me well. If it looks okay, I'm going to be sharing this stream with some people, seeing some more people joining. Like I said, today we're going to talk about the history of Freemasonry and George Washington. Or I guess a better way to put it would be talk about George Washington's Masonic history. But as always, don't forget to hit the like button and hit that subscribe button. And I won't be doing a stream tomorrow because I will be traveling. I may do a brief stream actually from Ontario or from Ottawa. We shall see. But I do hope everybody is doing well as always. And if you are from the States, I hope you're going to have a great July 4th long weekend. Let's give it a bit of time to see who joins the chat before I start talking again about the specific topics today. If your lodge is doing anything to celebrate July 4th and you're from the States, I'd love to know what you're up to, what is going on. If you are, it could be barbecue, could be parade, could be any number of things. So I'd love to know what you're planning, what your lodge is planning for Labor Day weekend. Or not Labor Day weekend, it's July 4th weekend. July 4th weekend in the States. By the way, I had a record number of subscribers in June, which was really awesome. So thank you so much for everybody who did subscribe during, the month of June. Now we're in the month of July. Let's see if we can't go again and have another round and have another record month. I'm just sending this off to a few people before I start talking about the specific topic of the day. By the way, I also found out as a child amputee, it is the 50th anniversary of the War Amps Champ program, which I did not know until I just found that out on social media. So thank you to the Champ program for 50 years of helping child amputees. I gotta get my coffee over here. Not just myself, but many child amputees all across Canada, as well as war amputees, starting in the First World War or after the First World War, and then moving on to today. And welcome if you're just joining us. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, jump in the chat. We are here today because it is July 3rd. Tomorrow, America will be celebrating 249 years. We're going to talk about George Washington and his Masonic career and his Masonic journey. But I want to give it a bit of time to see who jumps in the chat, who wants to say hello. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about Freemasonry, please do let me know. Now's the chance to ask any questions you might have. And even if it's a more negative question, or you have negative views of Freemasonry, you know what? I don't mind talking about that as well. Because even the negative views of Freemasonry, hopefully, I can try to convince you that maybe there's a little bit more to it than you think. Right? I've used this expression many times in the past. When it comes to Freemasonry, maybe I can't convince you that Freemasonry is good, but hopefully I can convince you that I'm good. Right? If I convince you that I'm good, then at least that's something. And then maybe you'll reconsider what you think of Freemasonry as we go. All right. Well, I guess what I'll do is I'll probably get started now just chatting about George Washington. But like I said, if at any point anybody wants to jump on or jump in the chat, please do so. Let me know. Maybe I'm getting some stuff incorrect. Like I said, I'm relying heavily for this one on the George Washington the Mason, which is an article from the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. And I'll leave a link to this probably in the description to this video. Right. George Washington joined the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, Virginia at the age of 20 in 1752. During the War for Independence, General Washington attended Masonic celebrations and religious observances, which are not the same thing, by the way. Masonic and religious are not the same, just to make that clear, in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. He also supported Masonic lodges that formed within Army regiments. At his first inauguration in 1791, President Washington took his oath of office on a Bible from St. John's Lodge in New York. During his 2 terms, he received Masonic delegations from several states and participated over the cornerstone laying ceremony for the U.S. Capitol in 1793. In retirement, Washington became a charter master of the newly chartered Alexandria Lodge No. 22 and sat for Porton in his Masonic regalia. In his death, he was buried with Masonic honors. If you're looking for a more extensive account than what I'm going to be providing here, there's a 2022 book, A Deserving Brother, George Washington and Freemasonry, written by Mark Tabbert. You can order it online. It gives you a more detailed kind of history of George Washington and his Masonic career, as well as a little bit more about his life. So I hope you guys will check that book out. So going through the kind of basic history of Brother George Washington, February 22nd, 1732, George Washington is born to Augustine Washington and Mary Ball Washington at Wakefield Farm, Westmoreland County, in the British colony of Virginia. He was the eldest of 6 children. In 1742, April 12th, his father passed away. He was 11 years of age at the time. In 1751, Washington and his half-brother sailed to Barbados. Washington returns to Virginia alone. Lawrence traveled to Bermuda before returning home. In 1752, September 1st of 1752, that is the first recorded meeting of the Masonic Lodge at Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is the lodge that George Washington would eventually join. 1752, November 4th, George Washington is initiated and entered apprentice Freemason, first degree, into the lodge at Fredericksburg, Virginia. Records show he paid £2, 3 shillings, and no pence when he joined. I have no idea what £2, 3 shillings, and no pence would be today. Actually, I'm curious about that. I wonder if I can find that out. If anybody knows, let me know. But let me see if I can find the conversion. Historical Monetary conversions. Oh, historical monetary value calculator. Okay. This one goes to 1913. Let's use Bank of England inflation calendar. Okay, let's see. How far back is it going to let me go? That's the question.
Right now, it's about $2 to the pound.
It's not going to be the same thing in 1752. Dad's saying right now it's about $2 to the pound. It's definitely not that now. 1752. 2 pounds. Let's say 3 pounds because it was 2 pounds. It doesn't give me an option for shillings. It was when he joined 2 pounds, 3 shillings, and no pence. So I'm going to round up to 3 pounds just because I can't get the shillings in there, which would be 188 pounds and 40 cents in today's dollars. So let's see what that would be. Pound to US and pound to Canada. So basically, that was equivalent to $257.16. So George Washington, to join Freemasonry, cost him in United States dollars at the time $257.16, which in Canadian, curious how much that'd be Canadian. Oops. No, I did that wrong. Let me try this with Canada. Pound to CAD. Let's see. 348. So basically, it cost George Washington when he joined Freemasonry. It cost him in that era's monetary value, 2 pounds, 3 shillings, which works out to about 188 pounds today, which is equivalent to 252 American dollars or 348 Canadian dollars. So he became a Freemason, entered apprentice September, or sorry, November 4th, 1752. In March 3rd, 1753, George Washington passed to the degree of a Fellowcraft at the same lodge. In August 4th of 1753, he was raised to the sublime degree of a Master Mason, or the third degree, at the same lodge in Fredericksburg, Virginia. September 1st, he attended his lodge. In June of 1754, there were several letters written from a Daniel Campbell to George Washington, which included mention of the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, including the election of officers and meetings therein. In 1755 of January, George Washington attended the Lodge in Fredericksburg, in part to witness his close friend and comrade James Mercer's third degree. We have a lot of information here about his military and his political history, which, again, if you're a George Washington historian fan, you'll probably love this type of stuff. Talking about Valley Forge in 1717. right? In 1779, June of 1779, George Washington attended meeting at West Point, New York, American Union Lodge, where the minute book records his name and also records him attending the St. John the Baptist celebration. St. John the Baptist being the patron saint of Freemasons, because, for amongst other reasons, it was on St. John the Baptist Day, June 24th, that the premier Grand Lodge of England was founded. It was also on June 24th that the Grand Lodge of Ireland was formed. The Grand Lodge of Ireland actually this year is celebrating its 300th anniversary. In 1782, August 1782, having received a letter with embroidered silk Masonic apron and sash from Elkanah Watson, an American, and Francis Corentin, a Frenchman, two commercial agents in Nantes, France, Washington sends his reply and a thank you note. It is generally accepted that Washington wore his apron at the 1793 U.S. Capitol Cornerstone Ceremony. In 1812, Lawrence Lewis, Washington's nephew, gave it to Alexander Washington, Lodge number 22, Alexandria, Virginia. The apron remains in the lodge's vault within the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. Amongst other things, this is probably a good lesson, a good reminder for people. Please make sure when it comes to it doesn't have to be, George Washington's apron, but when you have your records, your documents, your Masonic memorial, your Masonic items, please make sure you're taking the time to store them safely, properly, record them, right? Historical items are always going to be at risk for anything from, for anything from water damage to rodents could get to them, to fire, to getting lost over time. Keeping a record, keeping them safe, getting them properly insured, all that stuff is vitally important. Something I encourage all Masonic lodges to do is keep your inventory, right? Obviously, I suspect for these items, if you have George Washington's apron, you're probably keeping it pretty safe. But there are so many smaller Masonic lodges that have aprons and records and documents and letters from members dating back hundreds of years. Those are a treasure trove, not just of Masonic history, but of local community history. And keeping a record of it is valuable not just for the lodge, but also for the local historical communities. So do your best to do those things and keep track of those things. It'll pay off dividends if, heaven forbid, something were to happen. Um, December 1782, the Minute Book of Solomon Lodge number 1 in Poughkeepsie, New York, records Washington attending the Lodge St. John the Evangelist celebration. 1783, February 12th, Washington receives a Masonic oration from Continental Congressman James M. Varnum, South Kingston, Rhode Island. In 1783, while all of this is going on and George Washington is being, true to his Masonic duties, the Treaty of Paris is signed in France, formally ending the American War for Independence. In 1783, December 5th, Fredericksburg Lodge number 4 sends an invitation to Washington to attend its St. John's celebration in Fredericksburg, Virginia. In 1783, Washington returns his military commission to the Continental Congress sitting in Annapolis, Maryland. 1783, Washington arrives home at Mount Vernon. 1783, December 26th, day after Christmas, Boxing Day, letter from Alexandria Lodge number 39, Alexandria, Virginia, congratulating Washington on his happy homecoming and inviting him to attend St. John the Evangelist Day celebration. It would not shock me at all if George Washington received numerous letters from Masonic lodges all across kind of continental America at that time, inviting him to attend their events, congratulating him on his efforts, right? Which is something, again, I think more Masonic lodges need to be doing in 2025. If there's somebody to be a Mason who to be engaged in a lot of whatever it is, positive events, important events, he has some type of fame or reach, whether it be social media or otherwise, invite him to your lodge, right? Invite him to your lodge to talk, invite him to your lodge to take part in events. Maybe you can do something virtually. I mean, leveraging leaders to attend our lodges can be a great way to get more membership to attend our lodges, as well as a great way to encourage non-Masons to potentially, if not join, take an interest in Freemasonry, right? If there's a celebrity of some sort and they're attending a Masonic lodge and posting about attending their Masonic lodge on their social media, that can only help the craft grow, in my opinion. In Unfortunately, the December 26th letter from Alexandria Lodge inviting him to attend the St. John's celebration in 1783, December 28th, Washington replies to the master and wardens of Alexandria Lodge, regretfully declining the invitation. Even then, right, the fact that George Washington even took the time to write that letter declining the invitation, having a letter from George Washington in your records, that's a pretty big deal. Right, that stuff is important. That stuff matters. I'm assuming the lodge kept the records. It'd be really cool to see it. Um, in 1784, Lafayette visits Mount Vernon. Tradition holds he presented Washington with a Masonic apron. And what's interesting too, don't forget during this time, UGLE was not recognizing Masonic lodges in America. So, but as far as UGLE was concerned, at this time, he would have been a clandestine Mason, um, but not amongst other jurisdictions, obviously. In 1784, Washington received a Masonic address by Peter W. Yates of Schenectady, New York. In 1785, January 21st, Freemasons in Newport, Rhode Island sent a letter and address to Washington seeking support to retain lodge charter. No indication that Washington replied. In 1785, February 12th, Washington records in his diary that he walked in the Masonic funeral procession of Brother William Ramsey, Alexandria Lodge number 39. Must have been a pretty important fellow. How cool would that be to have George Washington in your Masonic funeral procession? I guess if it's a funeral procession, you're probably past caring, but the people still there would have thought it was pretty cool, I'm sure. 1787, at the first meeting of the U.S. Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Washington is unanimously elected president of the convention. In 1787, June 18th, during the Constitutional Convention, Washington receives a delegation from the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, which give him a copy of their 1783 Grand Constitutions. In 1788, a committee from Alexandria Lodge number 39 calls on Washington at Mount Vernon. They ask him to serve as charter master of the lodge as it seeks to move under the authority of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania to be re-chartered by the Grand Lodge of Virginia. Washington agrees. In 1788, Edmund Randolph, Grand Master of the Masons of Virginia, grants a charter to Alexandria Lodge as the 22nd lodge in Virginia. The charter names George Washington as the lodge's worshipful master. That charter is still in use by Alexandria Washington Lodge number 22. So again, just think how cool would it be to have in your lodge room a charter signed by the worshipful master or named, or a charter in which George Washington is named as the worshipful master of the lodge. He was reelected master of the lodge from December 27th, 1788 to December 27th, 1789. And while he is this, he is also unanimously elected the first president of the United States. How cool would it be, again, to have the worshipful master of your lodge be also the president of the United States? I think that would be pretty impressive, also pretty nerve-wracking. You wouldn't want to mess up your proficiency in front of the president of the United States, that's for sure. 1790, Washington sails up from New York City, arrives in Newport, Rhode Island, to congratulate the people on ratifying the U.S. Constitution and becoming the 13th state. On August 17th of 1790, the minutes of King David's Lodge number 1 of Newport, Rhode Island, record a unanimous resolution to present President Washington with a Masonic letter and address drafted, approved, and delivered to Washington. On August 22nd, Washington replies to King David Lodge's number 1 Newport, Rhode Island, stating in part, I shall always be happy to advance the interests of the society being Freemasonry, and be considered by them as a deserving brother. In 1790, Samuel G. Dorr of New York City, Dumfries, Virginia, in poverty and in need of assistance, sends a letter to Washington asking for his Masonic munificence. Try saying that 3 times fast. Masonic munificence. Again, imagine writing to the President of the United States, not as the President, but as a brother, asking him for charitable support during a time of need. From April 5th to June 12th, Washington tours the southern states of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Traveling south along the Atlantic coast, he returns north via Augusta, Georgia, Columbus, South Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Richmond, Virginia. I wonder how many Masonic lodges he visited during his travels. Probably quite a few. In April 13th, 1791, Washington receives a letter with a Masonic manuscript from the Deputy Grand Master of Virginia, John K. Reed of Richmond, Virginia. In 1791, President Washington delivers a welcome address from the officers of St. John's Lodge number 2 in New Bern, North Carolina. In April 20, 1791, Washington replies to St. John's Lodge number 2. Then you've got a welcome address from Georgetown Lodge number 16. In 1791, George Washington was greeted by the Grand Master of South Carolina, General Mordecai Gist, and is given a letter from Charleston, South Carolina. Washington replies to that one. Washington is greeted by the Grand Master of Georgia, George Houston, is given a letter from his Savannah, Georgia. So again, what you see is as he is traveling across America, he is visiting Masonic lodges. And again, it's just incredible to think about. Imagine if in 2025 the president were a Freemason, and as he's on his presidential duties, he's taking the time to stop in and visit Masonic lodges along his travel, right? That is pretty impressive to think about. And it shows you that, George Washington felt Freemasonry to be an incredibly important part of his life. He's getting a letter from Reverend Dr. William Smith, the ancient York Mason of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. He replies to the same. He receives a letter from Freemason Joseph Wanton Rhodes of Walpole, Massachusetts in 1792. And in 1792, December 5th, while he's on his Masonic treks, he is unanimously reelected President of the United States. In 1792, December 27th, Grand Master John Cutler and other officers of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts send a letter and enclose a copy of its newly published Grand Constitutions to President Washington. 1793, Washington replies to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts letter and its constituents. In 1793, Samuel Brooks of Philadelphia sends a letter describing himself as a poor widow's son to President Washington, seeking a position as an engraver in the U.S. Mint. There is no record or indication as to whether there's a reply. In 1793 was his second inauguration. That took place in March. I don't know when they moved it from March to January. I have to double check that. In 1793, August 29th, a letter from the Master and Officers of Alexandria Lodge, number 22, Alexandria, Virginia, to President Washington, requesting he sit for a portrait for artist William Williams. No reply from Washington is known, but he did sit for Williams, and the portrait was completed September of 1793. The portrait includes Washington wearing his Masonic jewel, sash, and apron, and is displayed in the replica lodge room of George Washington National Masonic Memorial in Alexandria, Virginia. In 1793, the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol is laid by three Masonic lodges, Potomac Lodge number 9 and Federal Lodge number 15 under the Grand Lodge of Maryland, and Alexandria number 22 under the Grand Lodge of Virginia, with President Washington presiding as acting master of the ceremony. Items used at the cornerstone ceremony include a silver trowel with an ivory handle made by John Duffy, a wood T-square and level owned by Alexandria Washington Lodge, a marble gavel with a wood handle made by John Duffy, owned by Potomac Lodge number 5. It's generally accepted that George Washington wore the Watson-Cassell apron sent to him in 1783 to the ceremony. In 1812, Lawrence Lewis, nephew of Washington, gave it to Alexandria Washington Lodge number 22, Alexandria, Virginia, where it remains today. Again, imagine how cool it'd be to see that. It makes me want to travel to some of those eastern parts of the states to see those things in person. Abraham Forrest, passing through Alexandria, sends a letter to Washington asking for Masonic charity and enclosing a list of those brother Masons who have helped him and a certificate for Washington's review. There is no record of the reply. But the President and Mrs. Washington in 1793 did contribute to the Grand Lodges of Pennsylvania's Relief Charity Fund, Philadelphia. Spirit, how's it going? Thank you for joining. Hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a great day. In 1793, Washington receives a copy of Josiah Bartlett's. Hey, Josiah Bartlett, that's the president from the West Wing. That's really cool. One of my favorite shows. A discourse on the origins and design of Freemasonry. In 1795, Washington receives copies of Sentimental and Masonic magazine, published in 5 volumes in Dublin, Ireland, July 1792 to December 1794, from John Jones. Jones requests a permission to dedicate the 6th volume to George Washington and include a portrait. There is no response to the reply. In 1795, June 24th, Washington receives a letter and Masonic sermon from Reverend Samuel Miller of New York, New York. August 18th of 1795, the U.S. ratifies the Jay Treaty with Great Britain. This treaty ensures the United States will remain neutral in the war between the Republic of France and European monarchies. In 1796, nearing completion of his second term of office, President Washington delivers his farewell address to the people of the United States. In 1796, the Grand Lodge, December 27th of 1796, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania delivers a letter congratulatory address written by Reverend Miller Smith to President Washington at his house in Philadelphia. And he replied accordingly. On January 23rd, 1797, there's a letter sent from Thomas Farrington, past Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, to President Washington, containing the following salutary sentiment Masonic, composed July 25th, 1792. When we recognize that star, which in ancient times appeared in the east to point out a savior to mankind, let us gratefully remember a Washington who, in later times, appeared in the west and led armies of America to victory and glory. So in 1797, John Adams inaugurated as the second president of the United States. In 1797, after leaving Philadelphia on March 9th, Washington and his family arrived back in Mount Vernon. Grandmaster Paul Revere, Grandmaster of the Masons, and officers of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts sent a congratulatory letter to Washington. March 28th of 1797, at Mount Vernon, Washington receives a Masonic delegation of Dennis Ramsey and Philip G. Marsteller of Alexandria Lodge number 22, with an address and invitation to dine with the lodge. And he dined with them on April 1st and presents a reply to the lodge's address. Washington replies to Grand Lodge of Massachusetts with a cover letter apologizing for the delay. On September 30th, 1797, James Ashburn sends George Washington a letter and printed flyer, Masonic miscellanies, with advertisements for the Masonic pocketbook. There is no record of Washington replying to Ashburn. In 1798, William Scales of Suttontown, New Hampshire, sends a letter to Washington stating his concerns for America's future and fears of clerical and Masonic deceptions and villainy. No record of response. In 1798, August 22nd, the Reverend J.W. Snyder and the Reformed Church of Fredericksburg, Maryland sends a letter to Washington regarding the Illuminati and Freemasonry in the United States. So even as early as 1798, um, George Washington was dealing with this stuff. And there's a lot of debates going back and forth. Looks like poor George Washington had to deal with the same conspiracy theories that we in Freemasonry have to deal with all the time. In 1799, December 14th, George Washington dies at 10:20 p.m. Washington is buried at Mount Vernon with Anglican Christian burial rite accompanied by a Masonic funeral ceremony conducted by members of Alexandria Lodge number 22. The Bible used at Washington's funeral is owned by Federal Lodge number 1, Washington, D.C. Bong, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. I hope you're also having a great day. I hope you're looking forward to what is going to be a great long weekend celebrating 249 years of the United States of America. I'm just talking about George Washington's Masonic history, because obviously makes sense when you have, uh, July 4th right around the corner. Obviously, Freemasonry and the Founding Fathers are connected. Sometimes I worry they get a little bit too connected in people's minds. I mean, George Washington wasn't exclusively a Freemason, he was a lot of things, but certainly Freemasonry seemed to be very important to his life. But Bong, let me know how it's going for you. Are you doing well? Having a good weekend? Having a good, I was going to say Friday, having a good Thursday? Let me know how it's going. I'll give you a minute to jump in. In 1800, by the way, I'll keep talking while I wait for Bong to see if he jumps back on. Oh, yeah, that's always sucks, doesn't it? You have a bunch of money and you're all excited, and then you have to pay all your bills, and suddenly you're broke again. Things would be going great if not for bills. Hopefully, though, maybe you still hope you have enough money left in the bank to maybe buy a couple hot dogs for July 4th. When I think of July 4th, oftentimes what I think about is eating hot dogs and hanging out. So maybe, hopefully, you'll have enough money for some hot dogs, maybe some pop. Let me know, by the way, Bong, if your Masonic Lodge is doing anything to celebrate the 4th of July. Having a barbecue, going on a float, anything like that. I'd love to know what you guys are up to. Um, in 1800, the Grand Lodge of Virginia lists Washington as a deceased member of Frederick's Lodge number 4. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. Forgive me for forgetting about that. In that case, let me know if you are doing anything to celebrate July 4th. Seeing some friends, seeing some family, all that good stuff. And forgive me, I completely forgot about that. But that's right. I do remember you used to be in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, and now you're down in the world of Kentucky. So hopefully I still remember that correctly. On January 11th, 1800, John Warren, Grand Master, and other officers of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts sent a letter conveying the sorrow and sympathy to Martha Washington on the death of her husband and requesting a lock of his hair as an invaluable relic of the hero and patriot. Could you imagine being part of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and having somewhere in your vault a lock of George Washington's hair? I wonder if they received it. Oh, yeah. Washington's private secretary, Tobias Lear, replies for Marshall Washington to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, thanking them for their sympathy and support and enclosing a lock of President Washington's hair. The Grand Lodge of Masons of Massachusetts keeps the lock of hair in a gold urn made by Paul Revere in 1800. Probably going to a friend's party barbecue. They usually do hot dogs and stuff. Nice, nice to all of that. I'm sure the barbecue steak will be delicious, and I am sure as well that I'm sure not only will the barbecue steak be delicious, but I'm sure the hot dogs will be great. I'm sure it's going to be, yeah, an awesome time. So I hope that you enjoy it. I've been to a few um, Masonic Fourth of July barbecues in my time when I visit the States, and they are always a lot of fun. So I really enjoy them. I enjoy barbecues in general, Masonic or otherwise. They're always a good time, especially on July 4th. In 1800, March 15th, January 1st, 1800. Well, you just have the steak yourself. You're the most important one. So you have the steak yourself. They'll be fine. They have hot dogs. That's more than good enough. On January 1st, 1800, French Lodge Laminate number 71 in Philadelphia conducts a Lodge of Sorrow for President Washington. After the ceremonies, the Lodge orator Simon Chardon gives an oration on Washington, followed by an address by the Lodge Master Joseph de Lagrange. On March 15th, 1800, three English translations of the oration with a cover letter are sent to Martha Washington. May 15th, 1800, Washington's private secretary Tobias Lear, in compliance with Mrs. Washington's request, acknowledged the receipt of the oration and gratefully recognized the lodge's sympathies in her affliction and irreparable loss. And then on 1802, May 22nd, Martha Washington dies at Mount Vernon. So I learned a couple cool things there. The coolest thing is the fact that there is still in the possession of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts a lock of George Washington's hair. And I hope, if nothing else, what this kind of reminds us of is the value and the importance of good Masonic record keeping. You know, this is one of those situations where not every lodge, in fact, the vast majority of lodges, vast, are not going to have a letter from George Washington in the records. They're not going to have a lock of George Washington's hair. They're not going to have anything related to George Washington. They probably will not have anything related to any Masonic president or president at all. But that doesn't mean the records that they have are not themselves valuable. And keeping track of what you have in your record books, keeping track of the Masons that have came before you, creating digital copies of the same, recording the information contained therein is so valuable because, again, these records are at risk. They're at risk of water damage, age, fire, heaven forbid, vermin. I mean, there are examples of Masonic lodges burning to the ground due to fire, and they didn't have a digital record of any of their documentation, so it was all lost forever. Right. And imagine if, again, I think the George Washington Monument is an example of something that does it right. But imagine if, throughout the centuries, people weren't paying attention to these records at all. Um, I think that would be a real shame. So I hope that this, if nothing else, is maybe encouraging us as Masons to be a little bit more valued, um, to care a little bit more about our records, pay attention to them. Just because you don't have George Washington in your records doesn't mean they're not important. In 1793, Washington participated as an honored guest in the Masonic cornerstone laying ceremony for the U.S. Capitol, wearing he did indeed. He was gifted a few different aprons over the years, but it looks like that was the one that was his favorite. Thank you, Bong, for chiming in with some fun facts. I truly appreciate it. Let me know how you're doing otherwise. I know you said you're doing well. You've got some steaks tonight, some barbecues tomorrow. So I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. Do you have anything else planned or anything else going on? We're waiting to see if some more people join. Did you know John Hancock, Freemason and founding father. Again, July 4th. We can talk about the founding fathers. Did you know that John Hancock, famous for his bold signature on the Declaration of Independence, was also a Freemason? He was a member of St. Andrew's Lodge in Boston. Hancock embodied the Masonic values of liberty, civic responsibility, and brotherhood. His leadership during the American Revolution and his service as president of the Continental Congress reflect the ideals of Freemasonry, truth, justice, and the pursuit of enlightenment. Freemasonry is absolutely an enlightenment tradition, in my opinion. You could argue the two greatest experiments of the Enlightenment era are America and Freemasonry, and the two of those are very, very much linked. Not trying to get overly intoxicated. That can be a tough thing to do sometimes, especially at a barbecue, but it's also a good thing to do. So, try not to overdo it. Always good advice. Another founding father Freemason, Ben Franklin, also sometimes known as the Enlightened or Enlightenment Freemason. As he said, Masonry has made me better. Benjamin Franklin was a founding father, printer, inventor, diplomat, and proud Freemason. Initiated 1731, St. John's Lodge, Philadelphia. He was a Grand Master of Pennsylvania, 1734. He published the first Masonic book in America. Franklin believed in the brotherhood of man, the pursuit of truth, and building a better society through reason, virtue, and service, all Masonic principles. He once wrote, "As we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours." Paul Revere, another famous Masonic founding father, as he stated, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear." But Paul Revere wasn't just a midnight rider of legend. He was a proud Freemason and a driving force in America's fight for independence. He was initiated in 1760 at St. Andrew's Lodge in Boston, Grand Master of Massachusetts, 1795 to 1797. He was active in revolutionary circles, many of them rooted in Masonic lodges. As a silversmith, courier, and brother, Revere helped forge the ideals of liberty, fraternity that shaped a nation. Freemasonry and revolution march hand in hand, fueled by Enlightenment principles. There's that word again, Enlightenment principles, civic virtue, and brotherhood. All things that Freemasonry, in my opinion, champions. Did you know that many of America's founding fathers, oh, and celebrating, many people are celebrating America by blowing a small portion of it up, by which I'm assuming you're referring to fireworks. So have fun with those, but as always, be safe, be careful. Don't, don't allow the fireworks. I don't want you coming on the chat at some point next week and saying you're now chatting with five less fingers. So be safe, etc., etc. Follow all the rules, etc. But you're not alone in that, that's for sure. Did you know that many of America's founding fathers were Freemasons? From drafting the Declaration of Independence to laying the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol, Masons were instrumental in shaping the ideals and institutions of a new republic. Key Masonic founders: George Washington, first U.S. President and Worshipful Master; Benjamin Franklin, diplomat, inventor, Grand Master of Pennsylvania; Paul Revere, silversmith, midnight rider, Grand Master of Massachusetts; John Hancock, signer of the Declaration and proud Mason. Freemasonry's values of liberty, equality, and fraternity deeply influenced the birth of a nation. The tools of Masonry became symbols of American democracy: the square for fairness, the compass for moral boundaries, and the level for equality. Behind the scenes, in candlelight lodge rooms, the principles of freedom were not just discussed, they were put in actions. This is all from the Ontario Masonic Lodge 301 Instagram page. That is referencing Ontario, California, not Ontario, Canada. I did not know that. Okay, more fun facts. The first known Freemason resident in America was John Skene, a Scot who arrived in New Jersey in 1780, or sorry, 1682. Thank you for sharing that, Bong. That's really, really cool. I wonder what the, let's see this. This is kind of curious. First Masonic Lodge in States. The first Masonic Lodge in the United States was St. John's Lodge in Boston, Massachusetts, established in 1733. So it's interesting because, the Grand Lodge of England was formed in 1717, which makes me think that John Keene may have not have been a Mason when he arrived in 1682, may have became a Mason after the fact, or there were speculative Freemasons that existed prior to 1717, right? They just weren't part of the Premier Grand Lodge of England, later to become the United Grand Lodge of England. But that's really, really cool. So he must have been one of those speculative Masons who joined before the formation of the first Grand Lodge. Let me look him up. Oops, whoa, sorry about that. There we go. We're back. John Skeen. Let me see. First, oops, Freemason. So in 1682, Scott John Skeen came to New Jersey and was dedicated by the Grand Lodge of New Jersey as the first Freemason resident in America. In 1733, Henry Price, the provincial Grand Master of all of North America for the Grand Lodge of England, granted a charter to a group of Boston Freemasons. Welcome, I don't know how to pronounce that name to save my life. We're going to call you Star. Star says hello. Hello, Star. Chibuzor. I hope that you are doing well. I hope that you will take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button. We're talking about Freemasonry and the life of George Washington and the founding fathers of America for obvious reason. Tomorrow being the 249th anniversary of America. If you have any plans, if you're from America and you have any plans, please let me know what they are. I'd love to know, especially if they are Masonic plans of some sort. I love to know what lodges are doing to celebrate. Welcome back, Star. It's great to have you. So thank you for returning. How is it going? How is your day going? Let me know. Yes, yes, he did. In 1733, he was the provincial Grand Master over all of North America for the Grand Lodge of England. He was granted a charter to a group of Boston Freemasons. Good is good. Well, Star, I do hope you'll hit the like button if you've not done so yet. And also, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my other YouTube channels, which are my personal channels. They're not really about Freemasonry, though sometimes Freemasonry gets covered. They are personal channels. But yeah, I hope that you're doing well, and thank you so much for joining. And I hope you'll go back and watch this after and maybe hear some of the facts I provided about George Washington and his Masonic journey thus far. Or I guess it's over. But his Masonic journey, at least the things we know about. It's always possible. And I wouldn't doubt it that you come across some new information, maybe some letters that were, previously undiscovered from George Washington that sheds even more light on his Masonic career. But what we have now is the portrait of a Mason who very much cared about Freemasonry and engaged in Freemasonry even during and while also engaging in his presidential duties. Shoot, Bong, let me know what the question is. I'll do my best to answer. I can't promise you I'll have an answer, but I'll do my best. Let's give it a second for Bong to type in his question. I'll see if I can answer it. Hope I can. If not, maybe we'll have to find somebody. Well, I mean, that is kind of connected to Freemasonry in that there are a lot of Masonic generals on both sides. And actually, my Masonic jurisdiction in Essex includes the lodge in Amherstburg, which is the oldest lodge in the district, and which actually played host to both Canadian and American brethren, including what the legend goes, the day before the War of 1812 officially started, the general of American troops and the general of Canadian troops, or British troops at the time, were both in lodge together. At least so goes the legend. I mean, I guess what I'd say is there was no Canada in 1812, right? We were still British colony. There was Upper Canada, Lower Canada, but not the country of Canada as it would become in 1887. So it kind of is what it is, right? The landmass was Canada. We had an Upper Canada, we had a Lower Canada. We were kind of forging our own identity, separate from British and separate from England. Even though at that time we were not an independent state, and the British were providing all of our soldiers, all of our troops, and our governance. Um, all right, Star, you can be right back. When you come back, I hope you'll bring some people with you and maybe hit the like and subscribe button. But yeah, a lot of people say the War of 1812, it kind of went to status quo antebellum, meaning that once everything was finished, basically nothing had really changed, except we as Canadians did in fact burn your White House down, and we have those bragging rights. So yeah, it's a really cool connection. What happened on August 25th? I don't remember. I don't know a lot about the history of the War of 1812. Did you guys get one over on us in August 25th? Let me see. He sent a tornado that tore the British troops up. Well, so what you're saying is the Americans needed God to defend them. The British could do it on their own. So, there's that. On August 25th, during the War of 1812, the British forces, after capturing Washington, D.C., set fire to several post buildings, including the White House. The poor cornerstone that I think is still there, right? That George Washington laid. Or no, it wouldn't have been. Let me go back and find this now. What was it that he actually laid the cornerstone at? The cornerstone of the, so 1793, the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol is laid by three Masonic lodges, Potomac Lodge, Federal Lodge, and the Grand Lodge of Maryland. President Washington acting as acting master of the ceremony. Okay, so it is still there now. I would love to tour the White House and get to see that. That would be absolutely incredible. Let me know, Bong. Have you ever toured the White House? I feel like that's a thing that a lot of times happens. It seems like a lot of Americans have stories of touring the White House at different points in their history. The rain from the storm. See, so clearly you guys had God on your side, and us filthy Canadians slash British people had nothing. It's a wonder we made it at all. I'm perfectly fine with the idea of divine intervention, for the record. I'd rather be good than lucky. Okay, so yeah, the White House construction started October 13th, 1792, and the cornerstone was laid September 18th, 1793. So it took about a year, 11 months before they laid the cornerstone. It's funny, I have talked for years about the importance of maintaining our Masonic built history. One of the best examples of our Masonic built history is the White House, and yet we never really talk about it on here. Not as much as I should, anyways. I'm definitely going to be posting on my on my channel some quizzes from today's stream, asking questions like, you know, which founding father wrote the first Masonic book in America? When did the cornerstone ceremony at the White House take place? Other information about George Washington's history. So I will definitely be sharing a lot of this on social media. I hope that you guys will check it out as well. Let's give it a few more minutes. Let's see if anybody else jumps on to say hello. I'm going to put this down here for a moment about GW. All right, let's hear it. What are some fun facts you know? Put them in the chat. And by the way, Bong, I'm not sure if I asked you this yet. If I did, please forgive me. But if I didn't, if you know, if you have one word to describe Freemasonry, what word would you use? In case you're curious, the words I have so far are collaboration, brotherhood four times, architecture, mysticism, paradoxical, creator, GAOTU, light. Perfect. We got light on there. You are one of two people who gave light. So there you go. George Washington had to hitchhike to his inauguration. I did not know that. That's a cool fact. Thank you for sharing that. Did you know that the Bible used at his inauguration was from St. John's Lodge and is a Masonic Bible? So there's my fun fact. We're just going to give it another, let's say, 10 minutes. I'd love to know some more facts about George Washington from Bong. I'm sure he's got some other great ones. What is your Bong? What is your favorite Masonic George Washington fact? What's the cherry tree story? I don't know if I've ever heard that before. Is that the? Oh, is that the the what was it? Where he chopped down the cherry tree and said like it was not me, it was I, something like that. Father, I cannot tell a lie. I think I remember hearing that story. I don't remember it for sure. By the way, in case anybody cares at all, I have CNN on in the background. The House is holding the final vote on Trump's mega bill. Republicans right now 210 yay, 2 nays, 8 not voting. Democratic 211 nays, 1 not voting. Totals 213 to 213. Time remaining 40 seconds. Washington cultivated hemp, but only for rope sales and other products. I mean, I thought hemp was pretty common. I could be mistaken, but I thought that hemp as a material for rope and other like material for rope and sails was actually pretty common in George Washington's time. I could be mistaken. Um, but yeah, let me know. But that's a really cool piece of fact, piece of history. And also, you would think as a general, as someone who needed to make sure his people had the materials necessary to sail, and for other things, you need rope, you need sails, you need um, what is it you say there? You need all these different products. Doesn't surprise me at all that he would want to cultivate it. I'm sure he was encouraging others to cultivate it as well. After his presidency, Washington operated one of the largest whiskey distilleries in America, producing 11,000 gallons a year, making him a legal moonshiner of his time. I mean, it's funny how much Freemasons nowadays in some parts of the world are so anti-alcohol and anti-drinking. You think about that, you compare that to, George Washington operating the largest whiskey distillery in America, producing over 11,000 gallons in a year. That's pretty impressive. It's pretty cool. Making him a legal moonshiner of his time. I wonder if he ever produced any whiskey for Masonic events, like put some aside to give to his brothers. In case anybody's curious, I'm just looking at the big, beautiful bill right now. Republican 216 to 2. Democrat, so 216 yay, 2 nays, 2 not voting. Democratic 212 just saying nay. So the total is right now in the yes category 216, in the nay category 214, in the not voting category 2. I was thinking of talking a bit about this. Like, I'm always hesitant to talk about things like big, beautiful bills and everything else, or any, like, the thing about Freemasonry, and I've talked about this a million times, right? We cannot separate what's happening in the world from our Masonic lodges, whether that be what's happening economically, what's happening politically, excuse me, what's happening socially. Like, we need to pay attention to this stuff. And this big, beautiful bill is going to affect a lot of people in the United States in different ways. And depending on how it affects them, whether it be positive or negative, it's going to affect their ability to contribute to their lodge, to attend their lodge, right? If, for example, we do end up seeing a lot of people losing their Medicare or Medicaid, does that mean they're going to have to work longer, work more, are going to be in more financially dire straits? Are they going to be relying more upon Masonic lodges for charity? Or are they going to be spending less time at their Masonic lodges because they need to spend more time working because they're economically uncertain, right? All this stuff matters. But I don't know enough about the big, beautiful bill right now to really say too much more, except a bill of this size is probably going to affect every American, including Americans who are Freemasons, and it's probably worth exploring what those effects will be. In 1717, Washington was asked to be the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Virginia, but he declined, demonstrating his humility. Yes, he did do that. I think the bill focuses more on people taking advantage of Medicaid and Medicare, more so than people who actually need it. I mean, yeah, again, it's not something I know enough about to say. If it is the case of people not requiring Medicaid but getting it anyways, then I guess it makes sense to deal with that. Having said that, for me personally, again, I speak for myself, I just think the best way to do it is go by a single payer system in which, say, I think the Canadian system is, in my humble opinion, the best medical system. It's not the best as compared to some imaginative, system I could think up in my mind. Um, Certainly, I could imagine better alternatives, but in terms of what is actually exists in the world, I'm a big fan of the Canadian healthcare system. So I think instead of worrying about who is eligible for healthcare versus who isn't eligible for healthcare, just give everybody healthcare. Seems to be make the most sense to me. Hi, Cameron, and the bill may help some. It is already straining those who are barely scraping by. For people, systems. Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Like, I think in almost any bill, there's going to be trade-offs. It'll help some, it'll hurt others. It seems like what I'm seeing and reading is this bill is harmful to those who are scraping by, which does concern me a little bit. I mean, I sometimes think of it like, and my opinion on this has changed a lot. After his death, that would be George Washington. Alexandria Lodge, number 22 in Virginia, became Alexandria Washington Lodge in his honor and still preserves many of its Masonic artifacts. Yes, preservation of Masonic artifacts is key. And that's what I was talking about. It's so vital and valuable. And I think, again, it doesn't just have to be the presidents, Your first Grand Master, your first master of your lodge maybe he was not that important. Historically, he's important to your lodge. So protect, preserve his artifacts, his aprons, his correspondence, his minute book, all that stuff. I mean, my opinion on stuff like this oftentimes is it usually costs more. Awesome, Bong. Very, very cool. Maybe one day you can send me a picture of that. I'd love to see it as someone who loves Chicago so much. As someone who's worked in these fields, the amount of money that is spent trying to verify the eligibility for programs usually is more than the amount you save by just letting some, bad apples or fraudsters through. I mean, the example I often think of is school lunches, right? And free school lunches. I mean, if you could argue, and in good faith, you could say, look, school lunches are paid for by public tax dollars. If a child already has access to food at home and has, two parents and is financially stable, why should my tax dollars go to giving that child a free lunch at school? Shouldn't that child just be required to bring his own lunch? And we have some type of verification where at the beginning of the year, every child brings in some type of proof that he or she needs the free school lunch, right? And that's a fair argument, and it's coming from a place of desiring or being desirous of protection of taxpayer dollars. The problem with that as an idea, though, is the amount of money and time it spends to verify which students are deserving of a free lunch versus which students are not deserving of a free lunch. Or not even deserving is the right word. Which students require a free lunch versus which students do not, right? The amount of time and effort that it takes the principal, the staff to verify, let's say you got a school of 500, to verify 500 students' information is going to cost you more than just giving that child a free lunch. On top of that, you have to keep in mind there may be situations where a parent may be embarrassed to admit that they can't afford lunches, so they may not fill out the proper forms, and then the child is one that suffers because now the child is going without. Or, I mean, I've heard stories, for example, of you have a parent who, let's say, has some type of drug addiction, whatever it might be, and it's not they just don't have the time to fill out the forms, or not don't have the time, they just can't fill out the forms because they're away, they're on drugs, they're not responsible, and again, the child is the one that suffers. And you also run into the issue of now you're separating the classroom because you have some students who are getting the free lunch. Oh, those are the poor students. Some students who aren't. Oh, those are the rich students. Doesn't it make more sense to just give everybody a free lunch? I know the struggle with that personally. And a lot of people do, Bong. You are not alone by any means. You're one of many, many. I mean, I kind of even think about this in my personal life. When I worked in a jail for about 5 years, and I was what was called a discharge planner. So one of the things that we did is we would meet with people before they were going to be released. I worked with both men. I worked both on the men's jail and in the women's jail. So I would meet with the men or women before they would get released and ask them, like, what do you need? How can we help you get what you need? Things of that nature. And one thing that often came up was food. So I started putting in, because usually in jail, in my jail, you would get released in the morning around, let's say 12, well, let's say around 11, between 10 and 11 a.m. usually is when you'd get released. There could be other times you could be released a lot later. Things could happen, short staff, but they tried to go between 10 and 11. So you get your breakfast, but you would be released before lunch or dinner. So I started requesting and putting in requesting that they be released with a bagged lunch. And it was pretty small. It was a sandwich, an apple, usually like a carton of milk, maybe some cheese and crackers. But it was relatively small stuff. And and then it came out, somebody complained about the bagged lunches, about how much it cost for a sandwich and an apple. And keep in mind, this is Canada, where I think sometimes we can be a little bit more charitable oriented than other countries sometimes, but not this person. And then it became this thing with, okay, so now we have to verify how far you're traveling. And if you're traveling outside of a certain radius, then you get one. But if you're traveling in the city, you don't. So then I had to start figuring out how can I get bag lunches for people who are in the city. And then I had to verify, if they were homeless or not, or what their income was. It became a whole thing. And the amount of money and in terms of time, the amount of time I spent and money and resources to like verify John Smith is homeless was far more than it would have been to just give them a sandwich, an apple, a carton of milk, and um like a cracker and cheese or whatever it was. So I remember I spent, a good portion, a few months really fighting for the bagged lunches. I haven't been at the jail for 5 years. I don't know whether they kept it going. I really hope they did. But that was something I was really proud of. But it's like, how much money could it possibly cost for, you know, especially because they're buying in bulk, right? All this food. So if those bag lunches cost more than $3 an inmate, I'd be amazed versus what you're giving to them, right? So I think, and it comes to that's what I kind of think about when I think about this big, beautiful bill. We're kind of getting off the Masonic topic now, but it's like, yeah, how much money are you saving by catching the few bad actors in Medicare versus how much money are you spending to enforce these things, to track down these people who may or may not need it? And how many people who do need it will now not get it because of some administrative loophole or some rule that's not being followed? In my humble opinion. Hello, Courtney. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining. Bong, I hope what I said made sense. Black Raven, I hope same thing. What I said made sense. And thank you, Bong, for sharing all of your facts about George Washington. That's what I was talking about earlier today on the stream. Facts and figures about George Washington and his Masonic history, which I thought were really, really cool. I'm probably not going to be streaming tomorrow because I'm going to be traveling and be in Ottawa. So I figured why not spend today talking about that. Um, for Medicaid specifically in 2024, Medicaid fraud control units obtained 1,151 convictions, 817 for fraud, 334 for patient abuse or neglect, and recovered 1.4 billion. That is impressive. And if that is the case, then so I guess my first question would be if 1,151 convictions, how many more are out there that we're not finding? Because 1,151 strikes me as the system as it was in 2024 was probably working pretty well. It's kind of like when people will say, they arrested 500 people last year. It's like that might mean the system is bad. That might mean the system is really good, right? Because that means the system is set up to catch 500 criminals. So, to what extent was things already well, and how much better could they be? The other thing I'd point out is it's interesting 334 for patient abuse or neglect. Like, I wonder what the difference is between fraud and patient abuse or neglect. Because my assumption is um, the patient abuse or neglect probably means a doctor billing Medicaid for work of some sort and then not doing the work that he billed Medicaid for or not doing the work that he billed Medicare for. So that would be fraud, right? Like what would be patient abuse or neglect under the Medicaid fraud? Like what would be the difference between a patient abuse and neglect and just fraud? Um, unless fraud is where it's being done by the patients themselves who are collecting benefits to which they're not entitled, or um, um, if it's being done by the doctor, is that abuse or neglect? I mean, and the other thing too is when it comes to this stuff, like even myself personally, so I remember this would have been 22 years ago. I was doing my taxes, one of the, first times doing them. sent them in, just let it be, right? And then about 5 or 6 months later, I got a phone call from the tax agency, uh, CRA, it's called. In America, it's called the IRS, right? But CRA. And I filled out my taxes wrong. I ended up having to pay 900 extra dollars in taxes that I did not realize I had to pay. You know, they never brought criminal charges or anything like that because obviously it wasn't a purposeful mistake. But I do wonder how many of those 1,151 convictions could have been mistakes that just the fraud unit decided wasn't, or like what was the conviction? Did it result in jail time? I mean, some of these things can be so complicated and so confusing. I don't know. I used to be different, in fairness. I used to be very different, but now I tend to be much more on the side of give people the benefit of the doubt. Um, assume a mistake more often than intentional fraud when it comes to these type of programs. You can have them pay things back. I had to pay back the $900, which was hard for me to do at the time because I was a student and broke, and that was a pain in the butt. But it's sometimes it's too easy, I think, to assume criminality where it doesn't suffice. And I do feel sometimes with this government currently in the States, they're too quick to assume when it's a poor individual that they're kind of defrauding the government and welfare queen type stuff. Whereas when it's rich people who make a mistake, like, President Trump, when he misfiled his taxes or whatever it is, and got the criminal conviction for that. Like when it's a rich or powerful person, it's much more leeway, much more willing to think they made a mistake. Because what was it like? President Trump misfiled $130,000 in taxes and was found guilty for it. It's like there's probably a million people walking around the states who have misfiled taxes, right? But they get, people going after them. Whereas when Donald Trump does it, even though he's found guilty of it, his supporters still give him the benefit of the doubt and say it was an honest mistake. So, um, you know, I think maybe it would be better if we were a little bit more forgiving. And in fairness, having said that, what I will say is, having worked in the government for years, I worked as a probation and parole officer. I worked as a legal advocate, articling student for people who were applying for social benefits, so welfare, and I worked for a jail. What I will find is, generally speaking, at least in Canada, our government is willing to give people a certain level of benefit of the doubt. Like, they're not going to let you just get away with it. So, for example, if you just don't pay your taxes ever, they're going to eventually come after you and have some questions. But if you're not making a ton of money, you can usually work with them to, like, I spent a lot of time as a legal aid advocate, articling student, writing letters to government agencies saying, like, yes, this person made this mistake. They owe this much money, but they're poor, they can't afford it, whatever it is, can we work out it? And usually they'd be willing to give you a payment plan or maybe even forgive some debt or whatever it is, right? Which I think is the right approach, again, because as a rule, I try not to assume criminality where a mistake is kind of sufficient to assume. Convictions from provider committing fraud and patient fraud. Okay, so then so provider committing fraud, my assumption is that would also fall under the line of patient abuse and neglect. Because again, if you're a provider and you're billing Medicare for medical work that you're not doing, either the patient is in on it or the patient is being neglected. Fraud is fraud, LOL. Fraud is fraud, but again, sometimes, again, never assume, because again, you could have if the government agent, I mean, again, it was just $900, but if the government agent I was working with in CRA decided they're having a bad day, maybe they would have decided, okay, we're going to go after this guy for fraud because he filled out his tax forms wrong. like, fraud is fraud, but sometimes I think what we call as fraud is more often than not just a mistake. I mean, even though, like I've said a million times, I'm no fan of his at all as a president, even for me, and when it came to Donald Trump and the whole thing with Stormy Daniels and the $130,000, I mean, my personal view is that was probably just an accounting mistake or an accounting error, right? Yet, based on what I saw of the info, right, I wasn't willing to consider that to be criminality, because again, it's like these tax forms, and from what I saw of it just looked like he was doing the accounting, and he had to figure out where to put the payment, and I don't know. I'm much less. Especially, it's funny because you think it'd be the opposite. After spending so much time in jail, so much working in a jail, spending so much time on these different things, I'm much less convinced that there's rampant fraud. I think much more often it's people filling out forms and trying to figure out where things fit and not always getting it right. Um, I mean, yeah, and at the end of the day, you do have to say at the end of the day, there's a court and the court makes a decision, and whatever the court decides, that's what it is. So if the court decides it's fraud, then it's fraud. I mean, that's what I used to tell guys when I was a probation officer, right? They'd come to me oftentimes and say they're innocent, the court made a mistake. I mean, my opinion was always, and I told them this, I said, look, I have no idea what happened. I wasn't there. I wasn't in the courtroom, nor was I there when, the police came and arrested you, nor was I there when whatever happened happened. So it's not my place to say what happened, right? It's my place to say there was a court decision. The decision was whatever it was. And my job is to monitor you to see that you are complying with those conditions. And if you choose not to, that's your choice. You're an adult, you're a human being. You can make whatever choices you want to. But then it's my responsibility to advise the courts. Right? And I always said, whatever you're charged with, and I still feel this way, I think this is the way it works, the only way it works. Whatever you're charged with, whatever you've been convicted of, so long as you are treating me and treating the decision with the respect it deserves, then I will treat you the same way. I'm not going to judge you based on what brought you here or your past history. It's about how you act with me moving forward and how you act with the courts and how you act with, the society in general. We talk a lot about Freemasons and charity. There's a lot of different ways to define charity. Most people think of it in terms of money, donating goods and services. To me, which it is, absolutely, but to me, you can also be charitable with forgiveness. You can also be charitable with your interpretation of things. You can choose the most uncharitable interpretation, or you can try to choose the most charitable interpretation. And I'll find, or volunteerism, donating time as well. And in my opinion, I find very often you'll be happier if you, even though I don't often do this myself, but I'm working on it. This is one of those say as I do as I say, not as I do situations. Oftentimes, being charitable in how you interpret the actions of others will lead you to a happier life, even though I fail that way more than I succeed in that. Yes, go help at an old folks' home or help a neighbor out as well. I agree. That's another example of charity. Douglas Marks, I am doing well. I hope you're doing well also. If you're not done so yet, I hope you hit the like button. Douglas, I don't know if you answered this question yet. If you didn't, I hope that you will take a moment now. If you could describe Freemasonry in one word, what word would you use? I'd love to know what your answer is. And the big, beautiful bill has passed. So we'll see. Like I said, I think Freemasons need to care about these things. Because again, if this, let's say this big, beautiful bill does remove somebody from Medicaid or Medicare, will that affect their ability to, um, will it affect their ability to attend lodge? Will they now need to rely on the lodge more for benevolence if they have medical bills? Occult, is that the word you provided before? Because somebody did provide that word previously. I forget if it was yourself. Um, in case anybody's curious, the words we've got so far. Okay, perfect. The words we've got so far, and they're interesting words. Some of them I find really interesting, is collaboration, brotherhood four times, architecture, mysticism, paradoxical, GAOTU, light two times, community, fellowship, care, money, privilege, camaraderie, brother, way of life. I know that's three words, but I hyphenated to make it one word because I cheated. Fight, pathway, enlightening, chill, freedom, fraternity, shine, curious, gay. Somebody was not a fan of Freemasonry when he said that, which I have found it funny because I asked him, so you say you're not a fan of Freemasonry. You also gave the word gay to describe it, which makes me think you have a negative view of gay people or the LGBT community. Because I said, why does gay automatically indicate a slur or something negative to you? And then he went on this tirade about what he thinks about LGBTQ people, which I will not respond to here, or will not say what he said, because it was very unkind things to say. But nonetheless, I still wrote it down because the purpose of me asking these questions is not just to get the positive words. I want to know what people think in general, whether it's positive or negative. Um, I want people to give me the what they think, kind of unvarnished. So we had where did I stop? We had curious, we had gay, we had virtue, we had Satanism. Again, someone not a fan of Freemasonry put the word Satanism there. We had no, we had baseball, we have occult, and we have curiosity. So there you go. So we're at 35 words. I said fight. I said fight because Freemasonry, it's about fighting for a better world. It's also about, sometimes it's really hard. You're tired, you've had a long day, you don't want to go to lodge, but you have to fight yourself in those cases to be willing to go to lodge, even though you may not want to. Um, and, in sometimes if you have an idea as to what you think Freemasonry should be, ought to be, needs to be, other Masonic brothers may have a different idea, and in which case sometimes you got to fight with them for better or worse to get what you want. You got to fight for your vision. Um, Sometimes against others who may have a different vision, and it doesn't mean fight as in it has to be contentious. Sometimes it kind of becomes that way, but you have to be willing to fight for what you think Freemasonry needs to be if you care about it. JS would be a waste of government funds to try in special court. Another word, builders or creators, those are both good words as well. Medicare fraud cases are committed by patients and doctors that generally prosecuted in federal court would make sense, right? I think that does make a lot of sense. Well, I'm sure that's the case that companies committing fraud and individuals committing fraud are handled differently. Because my suspicion is if it's a company, so if it's a provider, so that if I'm a, so I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to put it. So if I'm a doctor, but I work for a company, like let's say I'm a doctor and I work for a Medicaid company, and the Medicaid company is, as a matter of policy, like an Enron thing, are pushing through multiple, like they're encouraging their doctors to submit fraudulent Medicare claims to get paid. My assumption is the it's like an antitrust case, or not antitrust case, but it's some type of federal fraud case that's handled in a different way than let's say an individual, a patient, or a person who is submitting Medicare fraud versus individual fraud. I think, if I recall correctly, and And I don't know a lot about the states. Um, so let's see. Type of court. I think. Let's see. Medicare fraud, whether committed by a company or individual, is primarily addressed in federal criminal court. However, civil actions may also be pursued, and states may have separate Medicaid fraud investigations and prosecutions. Um, Medicare is a federal program, and fraud against it is a federal crime. Companies and individuals can face criminal charges for defrauding Medicare, potentially to hefty fines. Civil lawsuits can be filed to recover stolen Medicare funds. The False Claims Act allows individuals to sue on behalf of the government to recover money due to fraud. Medicaid, a joint federal state program, also faces fraud. States have Medicaid fraud control units to investigate and prosecute Medicaid fraud. State actions are separate from Medicaid cases, but may involve the same same penalties. So it looks like it depends on the route you want to go, but it looks like it is at first handled under federal courts, but then you can have criminal convictions for the perpetrators as well as fines for the companies, right? You can't send a company to jail, but I'm assuming the civic penalties for the companies. So I'm assuming it'd be the directors of the corporation face criminal charges in federal court, and the company itself is sued as an entity in civic court to recover damages on behalf of individuals. I'm sure, well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that it start with federal because if it's a federal program, then the feds are going to look at it first. But then, so like, let's say I'm a patient of a doctor. The doctor has been filing medical bills under Medicare on my behalf, but I don't know anything about it. I may be able to sue him civilly to recover those costs, or the states may sue him civilly to recover those costs as well, or the feds may. But yeah. I mean, I don't know. This is kind of an interesting topic. It's not something I know a ton about, so I'm certainly not going to pretend to be an expert. A lot of this stuff I'm going to talking out of my butt. However, I do want to do a stream where I talk more about the extent to which this big, beautiful bill will affect people and the extent to which I think that effect will trickle down to Freemasons. We must be very well trained and alert. That's true. I mean, I think a lot of it comes to just how well are you know your doctor, probably. But again, to me, instead of worrying about who's eligible for Medicare, who isn't, who's deserving of fraud, or who's eligible, who's not, to me, it makes way more sense to just say everybody's eligible for medical care and have a single payer system where you pay into the system and then you go to the doctors and you get your medical care without having to worry about insurance or bills or anything like that. That is my humble opinion. Take it for what it's worth. I wanted to check. So in Canada, the founder of our medical system was a gentleman named Tommy Douglas. I wonder if he was a Freemason or not. Let's look. Oh, looks like he was. Thomas Clement Tommy Douglas was a Scottish-born Canadian politician. He was born October 20th, 1904. Age of 6, immigrated to family. Just before the family left for Canada, Douglas fell and hurt his knee. After several surgeries in Scotland, the problem returned when the family reached Canada. The initial treatment prescribed was to amputate the leg. A leading surgeon convinced the family to allow him to work on Douglas in exchange for medical students observing the treatment. This colored his opinions on public health care for the rest of his life. So Tommy Douglas, the founder of our medical system here in Canada, was a Freemason. So that's kind of cool. I thought he was. But I do hope everybody is doing well. Thank you again. I had a record number of subscribers join my stream, join my Masonic, join this YouTube channel in June, which thank you so much for that. I truly, truly appreciate it. I hopefully will get even an even more subscribers join in June and an even bigger record number. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining. If you joined earlier, I hope you enjoyed learning all about George Washington. Pay attention to my channel because I will be posting some quizzes about the history of the history of George Washington and Masonic. So you can answer those questions, see how well you're paying attention. Bong, thank you for joining. Black Raven, thank you for joining. Courtney, thank you for joining. And I hope everybody have a very, very great day and enjoy your July 4th long weekend. And thank you everybody for joining. Bong, enjoy your hot dogs. Black Raven, thank you for joining. I hope everybody has a great night. All right, talk to everybody later. Or great day, I should say. It's still early. All right, happy 4th of July.